Hi, I'm Bruce Kyle. I'm an architect evangelist at Microsoft. I work with software companies in the Pacific Northwest. I'd like to introduce Stuart Solarier. Stuart is a software architect with CheckFree and is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional.
Hi, I'm Stuart Solarier, and I blog at visualstuart.net. I'm a Microsoft MVP on connected systems. Until now, most of us have been programming in C# 1.0. Even if we've got a newer version of the language, we've pretty much treated it as if it were the same old language. We're kind of stuck in that .NET 1.1 era. So what's new since 2003? What changes the way we program? Let's focus on the language, not practices, not applicability, not even usefulness. Okay, in an approach like that, opportunity for abuse abounds. We're going to cover just enough to be dangerous.
Hey, Stuart. What's today's whirlwind?
Today we're going to take one more look at C# 3.0. We've been looking at a lot of slides. They've been going by pretty quick, and I haven't written any code, which kind of makes my fingers itchy. So we're going to write some code. We're going to bring a number of these features all together in LINQ. LINQ stands for Language Integrated Query. I know they had to capitalize the N just to make it work, but it works for me. So let's go and do a demo. Demo is not short for demolition, I hope. Let's do our demo. I have over here Visual Studio 2008 running with the .NET 3.5 framework and C# 3.0. I've written just a bare bones part of a standard console application, and I'm going to begin by invoking a method that I haven't written yet, and I'll go ahead and let the compiler stub out that method for me. And we'll throw away their little throw, and let's begin by declaring a variable called query. And I'm going to start filling out that query. This is going to be a query over some data. I'm going to use some data that's part of an in-memory representation of some kind of data. That's going to be let's see. How about my app domain? Let's get the current app domain, and let's go get all of the assemblies in that. If I take a look at the type of that, that returns a type of array of assembly. So from A in array of assemblies, A is going to be taking on the value of each of those assemblies in a queryable form. So let's filter those. Where A dot let's say global assembly cache. So that assembly has to be in the global assembly cache for it to be included in my query. Order by. This is a blue keyword. In fact, so are from and in and where. I'm getting compiler help. I'm getting language support for queries. This is language integrated queries. If I think about this, in fact, in terms of SQL commands that I might build inside of my procedural code, well, the compiler can help me with making sure that the quotation marks are in the right place. And that's about it. It can't tell me, did I have the SQL syntax correct? Did I spell the words correctly? Are the names of the columns correct? Have they changed? None of that. Here I'm getting a full integrated support for query. So let's sort these by, let's say, the full name of the assembly. And finally, let's do a select. And I'm going to use that anonymous type syntax that we saw before. So I'm just newing up something, but I'm not going to give it a name, and I just begin with an open curly brace. Let's create an alias called name, which is going to be an alias for the full name. So I've got a property called name, and I'm going to have a property called code, which I just arbitrarily choose to be how I want to represent code base, and I'm done with my query. If you're familiar with SQL, you might notice that the select statement comes at the end. The reason for that is so that the data source comes at the beginning, so that I get strongly typed data model all the way through. Well, now that I've got that, I should take a look at the type of that var query. This is strongly typed. So it says it's IEnumerable of t, where t is an anonymous type. And the tooltip there is telling me, in fact, what the structure of that anonymous type is. A lot of help there, a lot of support in my development environment. So let's go ahead and use that IEnumerable. So for each assembly that query returns, let's just do a console write line. And the things that we're going to write, how about the full name, and we'll go fill in that parameter, and the code base, and we'll go fill in that parameter too, and maybe just for prettiness' sake, a new line. So let's go to my assembly variable, and I want my name. See how I'm getting strongly typed names. I'm getting help from IntelliSense. I'm exploring my data model as I'm typing this. So I am able to focus on the declarative nature of this, where my brain can be occupied with what it was I was dealing with, not the intricacies of how I got it. And let's call that done. Okay, so I'm going to hit F5 and run it. And if I'm lucky, hey, there's my list of the assemblies that were loaded into the GAC, sorted by the code base. Excellent. Now there are a number of other features that we've looked at, and it's hard to see where some of them are here. So let's just go ahead and write something that's the moral equivalent of what we just wrote. I'm going to put a little banner on top of this here, and we'll call that query. And let me go and create another, tell you what, we'll do it this way. Copy. Yay. And I'm going to copy this entire method, and I'm going to write something that does exactly the same work. So in this new method, let me go ahead and delete some of that LINQ syntax, and let's just think about that array of assemblies that get assemblies returns. And I'm going to use an extension method. That's just a static method that I can call as if it is a instance method. So I get to use that dot syntax. Where, and now I'm going to write a lambda expression, and it's going to map A to A dot global assembly cache equals true. So I've got an extension method and a lambda expression that stand for what we wrote in this line up here. Similarly, order by I can replace by another extension method, and I'm going to write yet another lambda expression because it's a nice dense syntax, and I want for everything that comes in to have this function produce the full name. And finally, let's replace the select statement with, you guessed it, another extension method. And this select is going to map A goes to new and code and I maintain that these are exactly equivalent expressions. Now one's a little bit easier to read, I think, because I get a lot more blue. Um, the syntax pops out at me. It's considerably cleaner. I don't have to write the lambda expressions inside of the extension methods. But these are both the same. Let me test my luck and go ahead and hit F5 again. And I'll scroll back up to the top, and I happen to notice that the first one is the Visual Studio Debugger Runtime Assembly. Let me take a look down here for extension. The first one listed is the Visual Studio Debugger Runtime Assembly. So that's a good enough check for me, at least for the purposes of this demo, that in fact these two pieces of code do exactly the same thing. If I wanted to go to greater extremes, I could say, well, let's see, these lambda expressions, those are just delegates. I could rewrite each of those as a delegate method somewhere else and pass that in here. I could take all of those extension methods and make the calls using the static method invocation syntax. What I would see is a progression of harder and harder to read code where the intention of the programmer is harder to discern. If I wanted to, in that final expansion of what this is really doing, if I then wanted to look at that and say, how do I change the sort order? It might take me staring at it for several minutes, and I might not even be certain that I got it correctly. So this is a much more declarative way of saying what I want and making it making the intention of the programmer so much more clear. Not only does that help the programmer, but the poor programmer who comes after them, who has to maintain, support, extend this code. Great. That was our LINQ demo. We only covered a little bit of the query expression syntax that's provided in there. Notice, for example, in the full syntax that I can do joins, I can do groupings, I can do nested queries, a lot of support there. There's some great articles and books on LINQ. Go check them out. There are LINQ providers for LINQ to objects. That's what we did. We had an object graph in memory. We had an array of assembly type. And we were able to do querying over that without any difficulty. There's also a provider for LINQ to XML so that I can use that same syntax querying over XML data sources. There's also LINQ to SQL. Again, exactly the same syntax querying over each type of data. I'm not having to think of a different paradigm for manipulating the different kinds of data. They're all brought together in the syntax of LINQ. Something to note here that was really important to me, when I'm talking about LINQ to SQL and those kind of look like dynamic query, it doesn't need to be, because the source for the query could be the return value of some sprock. So then I might, once I get it back from the stored procedure, massage it into the correct shape, for example, for me to then directly data bind that to some control. Coming soon to a computer near you, LINQ to the ADO.NET Entity Framework. Go check out the Entity Framework. It will be releasing sometime later this year as a service pack to the .NET 3.5 framework. I also invite you to think about LINQ to My Custom Domain. Why? If you go up on Codeplex, you can find providers for LINQ to Flickr. People have written LINQ to Amazon. And really what we're saying is, I have a domain model, I have a domain-specific language about that model, and I want to expose that so that I query that in the same way that I query all data in my application. If you'd like to check out LINQ, I highly recommend spending some time with LINQPad at linkpad.net. It's a great way to go explore the query syntax. In our sessions, we really had no time for system.transactions. Now, admittedly, system.transactions is a framework feature, not a language feature, and we've been focused on language features. That said, system.transactions is a huge feature that will change the fundamental way that you write code. I leave that as an exercise to the reader. Check it out, system.transactions. Couple of quick references for you. They're on my blog, but there are two great articles in the MSDN library that summarize the features introduced in both versions of the language C# 2.0 and 3.0. As well, I'd like to point you to Juval Louis' excellent MSDN magazine article on some of the less glamorous features which we covered earlier from C# 2.0. Well written. I always enjoy reading Juval's work. And that's online as well. The format for my presentation was inspired by Dick Hart. If you don't know Dick, check him out. This URL is for his OSCON 2005 keynote address on Identity 2.0. Quite a great speaker. I really admire his work. And he in turn was inspired by law professor Lawrence Lessig, who does a lot of work in intellectual property and the law. So check out his work as well. Huge inspiration. Let's get ourselves away from bullet points and into meaningful presentations. Again, I've been Stuart Solarier, and I blog at visualstuart.net. I'll see you there.
Hey, thanks, Stuart. For more information for software developers, see the US ISV Developer Evangelist blog on MSDN.